My name is Nate Mickle. You're listening to Mickles and Dimes Layer 2, where every interview is dedicated to the simple, the practical, and the underappreciated. Adam Wowak is a professor of management and organization in the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame, where he teaches strategic management to MBA and Ph.D. students. Adam's research focuses on strategic leadership and corporate governance. His work has appeared in top-tier academic journals, including Administrative Science Quarterly, Academy of Management Review, Academy of Management Journal, Strategic Management Journal, and Organization Science, among others. His research has also been profiled in media outlets such as The Atlantic, Financial Times, Forbes, NBC News, New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal. Adam received both his bachelor's degree and Ph.D. from Penn State University. I hope you enjoy learning from Adam Wowak today. Great to connect today, Adam. When I moved to Notre Dame in 2018, you were one of my first friends. Plus, I learned a handful of things from you that I still apply in the classroom. So it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Great to be here.
So as you think back on your career, what lesson have you learned that you would most like to share with others?
Yeah, so I figured I could talk a little bit about kind of my own career trajectory today, and specifically the importance of trade-offs in the decisions that we make. Again, I'll talk about it mostly in the context of a career, but it applies in kind of lots of areas of life. As a bit of background, early 2000s, I graduated from undergrad. My degree was in finance, and I worked in investment banking, middle market investment banking. So I wasn't doing the Wall Street thing, but was working at, I worked for a few middle market banks in Philly. And my experience in that career was very kind of illuminating. It was definitely not the horror story that you sometimes hear about. I liked a lot of aspects of it. I worked with great people. The job itself was, challenging from an intellectual perspective, but I kind of felt like it was missing something, or I was missing something. It definitely wasn't waking up every day kind of excited to go in. It was fine. I was okay with it. But it wasn't something that was really kind of fulfilling. And honestly, in some ways, and this is kind of where the idea of trade-offs comes into play, in my view, that can be harder than hating your job, because when you hate your job, things are pretty easy and pretty clear cut, right? You need to do something else, time to leave, time to find an alternative. But in which case, again, decision would have been easy. But I was kind of stuck in this murky middle. Some things about the job I liked, but it ultimately wasn't fulfilling. So at the end of the day, I made a trade-off. I decided that wasn't going to work for me, and I left the career. I did career counseling. I talked to people. I did a lot of research. I kind of tried to break the job down into the parts, the specific elements that I enjoyed and specific elements that I didn't necessarily didn't click kind of with my personality. And through that process, came to realize that, going back and getting my PhD in management was something that obviously carried some costs and trade-offs in terms of things that I was gaining, things that I was losing by switching. But ultimately, for me, was the much more kind of fulfilling option. And today, I'm a professor at Notre Dame, and kind of things kind of worked out. And that process really clarified kind of the importance of thinking about these decisions in terms of trade-offs.
So a phrase I heard that I loved was you have to be really careful about doing something you're good at that the market values that you don't love. That's like one of the most dangerous places to be.
Sure.
Right? I can really relate to you in this because when I graduated in business undergrad, I had a number of different jobs / careers, and it took me a while to find this career, which I absolutely love. So as you think about the difference between risks and trade-offs, why was the trade-off lens a little more helpful to go through or think through compared to the risk lens?
Well, I think that, and again, they're related concepts, and an economist would say, aren't you just talking about opportunity cost, which is also kind of, similar and conceptually to this idea of trade-offs. So basically, these things are often hidden, right? Risks, people think, oh, if I quit this job and take some other job, there's a risk there. There's this tangible thing I'm giving up, this tangible thing I'm changing, and it's easy to think about in terms of kind of a cost benefit ratio. But trade-offs are often hidden, right? And the trade-off of doing nothing is that you're foregoing kind of these other paths and potentially kind of giving up things that you would otherwise you know, get, by choosing, door number 2, door number 3, and choosing not to do anything carries, I guess we take it back to the risk line, its own risk, right? If you're in a career and are unfulfilled by it, but there's enough aspects of it that you like, and you just kind of, inertia wins out and you stay in it. Well, you're leaving something on the table by doing that. So thinking about it in terms of trade-offs kind of clarifies that, and it forces you to think about what matters most to you, right? And no two people are going to have the exact same kind of values hierarchy and kind of things that they're looking for. And until you kind of confront that choice and think about it in tangible terms, what matters to me? What do I value? How does that align with what I'm doing now? And the kind of the hidden part, what else might I do? What else might I pursue that'll allow me to maybe kind of fulfill those values and preferences in a way that my current situation is not kind of allowing me for. But conversely, by pursuing that path, what am I giving up? So in my case, doing iBanking, which is, again, is a great career for a lot of people, and I certainly liked a lot of aspects of it. But the things that it brought, the financial rewards, kind of the status, the prestige, whatever, were fine, but I didn't have any autonomy in that job. I didn't have many creative outlets. I didn't get to write as much as I did. I love to write, and I wanted a career that kind of emphasized that. And until I got into that situation where I was working a job that was fine but wasn't for me, I hadn't kind of done that math in my head. I hadn't figured out that kind of set of things and kind of it hadn't crystallized for me. But by thinking about these things in terms of, as a tangible choice, trade-off, it kind of clarified what mattered the most, if that makes sense.
So when you think about risks, or when lay people think about risk, does it seem like people are more focused on like the cost? Whereas when people think about trade-offs, it's easier to think more about like some of the upside and just think more holistically.
It's more holistically, I guess, and again, some of this is semantics, but I think of trade-offs as more kind of multidimensional in terms of, you make trade-offs, when you woke up this morning, you made trade-offs in terms of what do I want for breakfast? How am I going to spend my time today? What am I going to work on today? And these trade-offs are happening kind of all the time, and that doesn't really fit in a kind of a risk lens as much. So for me, again, that is just kind of the way that's kind of my starting point for these things. And I just like that it forces you to, clarify what matters most to you. So yeah, I guess that's my thoughts there.
So yeah, it helps us just clarify what matters most, as opposed to just like thinking like the risk. If I quit this job, all this downside and
right. The other thing is, you just mentioned, if I quit this job, what happens? Well, the other thing to think about when you're making trade-offs, and again, I realize this is mostly career oriented, but you can think of it in other domains of life. But by making trade-offs, often you're creating space for growth, right? So for me, when I left, my career, it was kind of, well, what do I do next? Well, I was at a point in my life, thankfully, where I was young enough that I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. I didn't have a family yet. So I was a little bit lucky in that regard. I had space to kind of explore. And I spent a lot of time. I should clarify up front. I didn't know when I left iBanking exactly what I wanted to do next. I just knew that wasn't it. And I needed to figure it out, and I needed space and time to do that. So that's what I did. And then all of a sudden I had all this open space. What do I do? I ended up taking a job actually at the University of Maryland. I was an administrative assistant. It was a job that is not something that maybe would have, thought of doing given my background. But what it allowed me to do was I was going to PhD seminars. I was talking to professors. I was on campus there every day. So that really helped me realize that that's what I wanted to do, and gave me kind of firsthand experience. I never would have been able to do that if I had just kind of researched on the side while I was working at iBanking. And again, I'm not saying that people should just up and quit their jobs without having a plan B in place, but there often is legwork to be done to kind of figure out what you want to do next. It doesn't necessarily come from just sitting around daydreaming. What job do I mean? Yeah, we could all daydream about jobs that we would love to do, But until you're kind of confronted with these choices and have to do the math in your head of, okay, what matters most to me? What is maybe less important for me? That's kind of how these things get clarified, I think.
One of my all-time favorite ideas that I heard about 2 years ago that I literally probably think about every day, and it's probably the phrase I mention most often on this podcast, is there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love that idea.
Hmm.
And this is kind of what you're talking about, right?
Right, right. And the one thing that is easy to, I guess, so when I touched on this earlier, but one of the things that I tell my students, or at least I try to tell or work into my classes when I'm talking to my students, is that when you're trying to figure out what you want to do, especially those early jobs, it's different. When you're at your point in the career, my point in the career, things are different. They're a little more crystallized. But early on in your career, I kind of think of it in terms of you can fall into these three buckets, right? With your first job or two, you can love your job right off the bat. You nail it right out of the gate. And those people won the lottery. That's great. You're done. You can just kind of continue on that path. And that's, most people don't end up there, but if you do, wonderful. You can end up doing something that you absolutely don't like, that you hate, that is just not for you. And every day you wake up, this is just absolutely not for me. That's fine too. And again, I think I talked about this before, but people tend to be motivated to change when they're miserable. But it's so easy, I think, and I know a lot of people who this has happened to, that you can just drift. You can be somewhere in the middle, and sort of in the situation I was, where maybe you like people you work with, you kind of like some aspects of it. It's not, pulling teeth to go into work every day. It's fine. But ultimately it's not fulfilling. I think that's the situation where if you're not careful, you can wake up 20 years later and say, what happened? I missed it. What am I doing? I could have, there's this alternative Doc Brown timeline that I didn't take, and, things would have been different. And though that's the situation where you really have to kind of force yourself to think about trade-offs. And that's kind of where I was. And I think that's where a lot of people can inadvertently get stuck.
I appreciate this so much too, because I went back to school when I was 29, went back to law school, started a PhD program at 32,
Mhm.
started a postdoc at 37.
Mhm.
And so I hear some people saying, like, what are you doing? He doesn't know what he's doing. In some ways they were right. But for me, it was like I was searching after, and this goes back to some research in psychology, Deci and Ryan talking about our fundamental needs and motives as humans is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. You mentioned autonomy, right? Like these are three of the most fundamental needs we have. And if we spend so much of our time without autonomy, where we're working on something that we're not improving at, we're not mastering, and we don't feel greater purpose, our life will likely not be as fulfilling. And so I was looking for those three things. I was experimenting, I was sampling, and then one of the guests of the podcast, my Econ 110 professor, Arden Pope, his advice was experiment, and then when you find something that you love, just latch onto it. When you find a good opportunity, latch onto it. And I love that, and that's what you're talking about. Sample, experiment. That's what you were doing at Maryland, and then you found it and you latched onto it.
Mm-hmm.
Any final things you would like to share here as we wrap up, Adam?
Yeah, not really. I just think that, and again, everyone's path is different, and also I don't want to make it sound like in my own case everything was perfect and went off without a hitch one time. And like everyone, I've had hiccups along the way, and there were certainly challenges involved. And moreover, the kind of the trade-offs that I made, or in this case, the trade-off that I made going back to academia. Well, there's certain things you're never going to have that maybe would have been the case, and you're never going to make millions and millions of dollars and be, you're trading off in this case kind of wealth for, or in this one dimension, wealth for purpose, like you were saying, and autonomy. So for others, that calculus might be different, and others might find purpose in, working in this case, high banking. But what you really have to sit down and think about, what am I optimizing for? What is most important to me? And kind of the hand-in-hand question there is, what am I willing to sacrifice to get it? And, again, you might have a kind of implicit idea of these things, but it really helps to kind of have explicit understanding of these things and tangible situations that kind of force you to think about it. And then also, finally, if I end up in kind of the drift category, which again is easy to end up in, what is the hidden trade-off there? What am I sacrificing by doing nothing? Because people often think by doing nothing, they're not taking a risk. Well, you have to think about the paths not taken when you do that. And sometimes that's enough to kind of motivate action.
The first fall Saturday, 1st September, I am sad that I am not coaching college football, but the other 360 odd days of the year, I'm happy I'm not. So there's that trade. I made that trade-off years ago. It's like,
That's right.
I am sad on that day. I am sad a couple days each year.
Yep.
But that was a trade-off I made, and ultimately I'm happy with it. Well, Adam, I love this idea of thinking about trade-offs, thinking about the paths not taken, thinking about drift and the dangers associated with that. Again, I love the ideas. Great stuff. Thanks for coming on the podcast today, Adam.
All right, thanks, Nate.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mickles and Dimes with Adam Wowak. When Adam graduated college, he had a prestigious job as an investment banker. It paid well. It was intellectually challenging. He liked the people he was working with, but he wasn't excited to work every day. He didn't have autonomy, and he didn't have creative outlets. So he thought about the trade-offs he was making by staying. He then considered the trade-offs he would make by leaving. By thinking about trade-offs, Adam gained clarity on what mattered most to him. He ultimately chose to leave banking and found his way to academia, which had its own set of trade-offs, but ones that Adam was happier with. As Adam tells his students, there are 3 types of careers people can have: one they love, one they hate, and one they're okay with in the murky middle. And it's this third kind of career that people need to watch out for so that they don't drift and wake up 20 years later realizing they should have thought more carefully about the trade-offs they were making. In summary, remember to think about the trade-offs we're making, both when we stick with the status quo and when we decide to change. It's a simple idea. Please take it seriously.